The wind on the high plateau did not just blow, it scoured. It carried the grit of 1,000 miles of scorched earth, stripping the moisture from a man's skin and the hope from his heart, if he let it. Jake Monroe pulled the brim of his battered hat lower, squinting against the glare of the midday sun. The Arizona Territory in the 1870s was a place that seemed to actively resist habitation, a landscape of red rock and thorny mesquite that demanded a blood price for every inch of ground claimed. Jake sat atop his bay gelding, a horse as rib-thin and trail-hardened as its rider. Before him, a small herd of 30 steers moved sluggishly, heads low, kicking up clouds of alkali dust that hung in the still air like gun smoke. They were underfed, their coats dull, picking at tufts of dry grass that crumbled to powder between their teeth. Jake watched them with a critical, worried eye. He calculated the weight they were losing with every mile, the water they needed but would not find until they reached the lower wash. He steered the herd away from the open flats and toward a jagged scar in the earth he had spotted 2 days prior while tracking a stray calf. It was a narrow canyon, hidden by the optical illusions of heat shimmer and broken terrain. From a distance, the land looked solid, unbroken. But up close, the earth split open into deep arroyos and towering stone walls as the cattle bawled and stumbled down the sloping entrance to the canyon. Jake reined in his horse to study the ground. The floor of the wash was sandy, packed hard by flash floods that tore through here during the monsoon season, though those rains felt like a distant memory now. But it was not the sand that caught his attention. It was the stone, along the base of the canyon wall, where the sandstone shelves jutted out. The rock was worn smooth. Deep grooves were cut into the stone floor, parallel lines spaced as wide as a wagon axle. Jake dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel. He knelt, running a gloved hand over the ruts. They were ancient, smoothed by time and wind, but unmistakable. This must have been an old wagon road, he thought, perhaps Spanish explorers from centuries past, or early settlers who had passed through and never returned. If there was a road, there was a way through the maze of mesas. If there was a way through. He could shave 4 days off the drive to the railhead. 4 days meant less weight lost off the cattle. 4 days meant the difference between breaking even and bankruptcy. He stood up, dusting his knees. He looked deeper into the canyon shadows. The air was cooler here, smelling of dry stone and sage. It felt quiet, too quiet. But Jake Monroe was a man who had learned to suppress his instincts in favor of survival. He mounted his horse, whistled sharp and low to the cattle, and drove them into the unknown passage. The ride back to the ranch house that evening was a long study in harsh reality. The sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and blood orange. Distant thunderclouds piled up over the northern peaks, teasing the land with the promise of rain that Jake knew would likely evaporate before it hit the ground. He watched the Virga streaks hanging from the clouds like gray curtains, tantalizing and useless. The Monroe Ranch was not much to look at. It sat in a shallow valley where the wind swept through without pause. The main house was a half-finished structure of weathered gray boards that had warped in the relentless sun. The roof leaked when it did rain, and the wind whistled through gaps in the walls that Jake had been meaning to chink with mud and straw for 6 months. A barn, leaning heavily to the left, stood as a testament to his lack of time and resources. Jake rode past the small patch of corn he had attempted to grow near the windmill. The stalks were knee-high and yellowing, the leaves curling in on themselves like burning paper. The soil was just dust. He felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the crushing weight of responsibility. He had 2 cowhands to pay, animals to feed, and a mortgage held by a bank that had no interest in mercy. He dismounted at the corral, handing the reins to Silas. His older hand, Silas was a man carved from leather and gristle, with a face that looked like a dried apple. "How do they look?" Silas asked, nodding toward the horses. "They are thirsty," Jake said, his voice raspy from the dust. "We need to check the windmill pump again. It is drawing sand." Silas spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Everything draws sand out here. Boss, even the men." Jake walked into the house, the floorboards groaning under his boots. The interior was sparse. A table, 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, and a cot in the corner. He lit a kerosene lamp, the yellow light pushing back the shadows that seemed to pool in the corners of the room. He spread a hand-drawn map across the table, smoothing out the wrinkles. It was a crude representation of the territory, marked with charcoal lines and ink blots. He took a pencil and sketched a new line, cutting through the high mesas where he had been today. He marked the entrance with a heavy X. My secret trail. He whispered to the empty room. He traced the line with a calloused finger. If he could move the herd through there, he could bypass the long, waterless stretch of the salt flats. It was a lifeline. He just needed to make sure it was passable all the way through. He sat back, rubbing his eyes. Fatigue washed over him, but sleep was not something he welcomed easily. Sleep brought the dreams. It had been 10 years since the war, but for Jake, the cannon smoke had never quite cleared. He closed his eyes and saw the flash of bayonets in the Virginia woods. He saw the faces of boys who died calling for their mothers. But worse than the war between the states were the years that followed, the years he spent in a blue uniform out here, in the West. He remembered a village at dawn. He remembered the orders given by a captain who had lost his humanity. He remembered the smoke rising from burning lodges and the silence that followed the gunfire. He had resigned his commission a month later, walking away from the army with a sickness in his soul that no amount of whiskey could cure. He had come here, to this God-forsaken patch of earth, hoping that by building something, by sweating and bleeding into the soil, he could balance the ledger. He wanted to grow life where he had once helped extinguish it. But the land was not interested in his redemption. It only wanted his endurance. The next morning, Jake rode into the settlement that passed for a town, a cluster of false-fronted buildings clinging to the edge of a dry creek bed. He needed supplies, flour, coffee, and nails. The town was tense. He could feel it as he tied his horse to the rail outside the general store. Men stood in clusters on the boardwalk, speaking in low voices that stopped when he approached. They eyed his worn coat and the dust on his boots. He was a small rancher, struggling. And in this country, weakness was like blood in the water. Inside the store, the shopkeeper, a balding man named Mr. Henderson, weighed out the flour with agonizing slowness. "You hear about the railroad survey team?" Henderson asked. Not looking up, Jake shook his head. "Just rumors." Henderson grunted. "They say the surveyors are moving south, coming through the basin. If they lay track, land prices will jump. If they do not, well," he left the sentence hanging. Jake knew what he meant. If the railroad didn't come, this town would die, and the ranchers would starve. Jake paid with the last of his silver, the coins clinking softly on the counter. He walked out and headed for the saloon, needing a drink to cut the dust from his throat. The air inside was thick with stale smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. He ordered a whiskey and stood at the end of the bar, keeping to himself. Well, if it isn't the land baron of the Mesa. Jake turned to see Henry Barstow standing behind him. Barstow was everything Jake was not. He wore a clean suit of gray wool, a silk vest, and a hat that cost more than Jake's horse. He was a speculator, a man who made money moving paper while other men moved earth. Jake took a sip of his whiskey. "Henry," Barstow smiled, a gesture that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. "How is the spread?" "Jake, I heard your well is running dry." "We are managing," Jake said shortly. Barstow leaned in, smelling of bay rum and expensive cigars. "You know, I have buyers looking for grazing land. They are not picky about water rights. They just want the acreage on paper. I could give you a fair price. Jake, enough to get you a ticket back east, maybe start over somewhere green." "I am not selling," Jake said, setting his glass down hard enough to rattle the ice he didn't have. Barstow shrugged, dusting an imaginary speck of lint from his lapel. "Pride is a fine thing, Jake, but it does not feed cattle, and it certainly does not stop the bank from foreclosing. Just keep it in mind." Barstow's eyes drifted over Jake, analyzing him like he was a piece of livestock. "By the way, where does your northern line run exactly?" Up near that box canyon. Jake stiffened. Why do you ask? Curiosity, Barstow said smoothly. Just curiosity. Jake walked out of the saloon, his heart hammering a slow, angry rhythm against his ribs. He felt cornered. The town wanted his failure. The land wanted his life. And men like Barstow wanted the scraps. That night, the wind died down, leaving a silence so profound it felt heavy. Jake sat on the porch of his unfinished house, a tin cup of coffee in his hand. The coyotes were singing in the distance, a high, yipping chorus that usually made him feel less alone. Tonight, it just sounded mournful. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small silver locket. The metal was warm from his body heat. He snapped it open with his thumb. Inside was a tiny, tintype photograph of a woman with dark ringlets and serious eyes, Elizabeth. She had died of fever 3 weeks before their wedding, back in Ohio. That was the first death that broke him. The war had just shattered the pieces. He rubbed his thumb over her face, wearing the image down slowly over the years. I will not lose this place, he whispered to the dark. This ranch was his last stand. It was the only thing standing between him and the man he used to be, the soldier who followed orders, the drifter who drank to forget. He looked out at the shadowed shapes of the mesquite and the faint outline of the corral. He had promised himself a life not defined by violence, a life of building. If he lost this, he had nothing. At first light, Jake saddled the bay again. He called for Silas and the younger hand, Caleb. Caleb was barely 20, a kid from Missouri with big dreams and 0 sense. We are riding the canyon. Jake told them, I want to see where that trail leads. Bring axes and a shovel. They rode out as the sun breached the horizon, turning the red cliffs to fire. The heat rose quickly, shimmering off the rocks. When they reached the canyon entrance, the air changed, becoming still and trapped. They rode deeper than Jake had gone the day before. The walls narrowed, rising hundreds of feet on either side. The sky became a jagged ribbon of blue far above. Look at that, boss, Caleb said, pointing up. High on the canyon wall, under an overhang, were paintings. Faded red ochre figures, deer, handprints, and strange, elongated shapes that looked like spirits. Below them, near the ground, were piles of stones, cairns. They were stacked with precision, marking the path. Silas pulled his horse up short. His eyes darted around the shadows. I do not like this. Jake, it is just rocks, Jake said, though he felt a prickle on the back of his neck. It is Indian ground, Silas muttered. You see those marks? This is not just a trail. It is a spirit road, or a warpath. We should not be here. Jake set his jaw. It is a road, Silas, and it is on my land. According to the deed, my property line goes to the ridge. This canyon cuts right through it. He spurred his horse forward, ignoring the tightness in his gut. He could not afford superstition. He needed this route. They spent the day laboring in the heat. They cut back thickets of thorny brush that choked the narrow points of the trail. Jake used a hatchet to blaze marks into the trunks of cottonwood trees that grew near the dry wash, claiming the path with white scars on the bark. He paced out locations for a line shack, a place where a man could sleep while pushing the herd through. He planned where to dig out the sandy basins to create watering troughs. Every swing of the axe was a declaration. This is mine. I am using it. He worked with a desperate energy, sweat soaking his shirt, stinging his eyes. He was imposing his will on the landscape, trying to force it to yield a profit. He did not stop to think about who had stacked those cairns or who had painted the red figures. To him, they were artifacts of a past that was gone. He was the present. By late afternoon, the heat was a physical weight. Jake sent Silas and Caleb back to the ranch to fetch a wagon of supplies for the next day. I will camp here, Jake said. I want to see how the light hits the far end of the pass in the morning. Silas looked like he wanted to argue, but he just nodded and turned his horse. Jake watched them ride away until they were swallowed by the twist of the canyon. He was alone. He made camp beside a small spring he had found, a miraculous trickle of water seeping from a crack in the granite. It pooled in a stone basin before disappearing into the thirsty sand. He watered his horse and then sat with his back against a boulder, watching the light fade from the peaks. He took out a pouch of tobacco and rolled a cigarette, his fingers nimble from years of practice. He lit it, the sulfur flare of the match brief and bright in the twilight. He took a drag, and then, without really thinking about it, he pinched a small amount of loose tobacco from the pouch and sprinkled it on the ground near the water. "For the spirits," he murmured, a half-joke to himself, or perhaps an old soldier's habit of hedging bets. He did not know that he was being watched. High above, hidden in the deep fissures of the cliff face, Tala lay flat on her stomach. She blended perfectly with the stone, her buckskin tunic the color of the dust, her black hair bound back and covered with a strip of cloth. She had been watching the white man since he entered the canyon. She had watched him cut the brush. She had watched him scar the trees with his metal axe. Her hand gripped the wooden stock of her rifle, her knuckles white. She had seen many white men in these lands, soldiers with their blue coats and loud voices, moving like clumsy buffalo, breaking everything they touched, miners who tore open the earth with greed in their eyes. This man was different. He was quiet. She watched how he moved around his horse. He did not jerk the reins or shout. He spoke to the beast in low, soft tones. She saw him sit by the spring, and, to her surprise, she saw him leave the offering. Tobacco. It was a clumsy gesture, but it was an offering nonetheless. He is not a soldier, she thought, but he is here, and his presence was a poison. This canyon was not just rocks and sand. It was the artery of her people. It was the hidden way that connected the high summer camps to the low winter valleys. It was the path the ancestors walked. For a white man to claim it, to mark it, was to cut the throat of the tribe. She watched him lie down, pulling his blanket over his shoulders. He looked small against the vastness of the stone, small, but dangerous. Tala slipped backward, moving silently over the loose shale. She stood up only when she was deep in the shadows of the upper ridge. She turned and ran, her moccasins making no sound, heading for the high valley where the fires of her people burned low. The Apache camp was hidden in a bowl of granite peaks, invisible from the plains below. It was a place of stark, terrifying poverty. The shelters were hasty constructions of brush and scavenged canvas. There were no great herds of horses, no racks of drying meat. As Tala entered the circle of firelight, she saw the truth of their existence etched on the faces of her kin. The children sat listlessly, their eyes huge and hollow in gaunt faces. They did not play. They saved their energy for breathing. The elders were wrapped in blankets that were threadbare, shivering in the mountain chill. The game was gone. The buffalo were a memory, and the deer had been chased away by the cattle and the noise of the settlers. The government rations that were promised at the agency miles away rarely came, and when they did, the flour was full of weevils and the beef was rotten. Tala walked to the central fire. Nantan sat there. He was the elder, a man whose face was a map of every tragedy that had befallen them in the last 60 years. His hair was white, his eyes clouded with cataracts, but his mind was sharp as a skinning knife. Around him sat the few remaining warriors. They were lean, scarred men, their weapons cleaned and ready, but their ammunition pouches were light. "Tala," Nantan said, his voice a dry rasp. "What did you see?" Tala sat cross-legged across from him. "The rancher is alone at the spring," she said in their tongue. "He has cut the brush. He has marked the trees. He plans to bring his cattle through the canyon." A murmur of anger went around the circle. A young warrior named Ka slammed his hand against the ground. "We should kill him tonight," Ka hissed. "Slit his throat while he sleeps. He steals the road. He steals the water. Peace," Nantan commanded softly. Nantan looked at Tala. "Is he a soldier?" "No," Tala said. "He moves like a man who knows the land, but he is not hunting. He is building. He left tobacco at the spring." Nantan raised an eyebrow. "Tobacco? Yes." The elder stared into the fire. "He respects the spirit, perhaps, but he destroys the body. If he blocks the canyon with his cattle, we cannot move to the winter grounds." We cannot trade with the cousins in the south. We will be trapped here, in the snow, and we will starve." He looked around the circle at the starving children, the desperate mothers. "The canyon is our life," Nantan said. "We cannot let him take it." "Then we fight," Ka said, reaching for his knife. "No," Nantan said. "If we kill him, the soldiers will come from the fort. They will hunt us down like wolves. We have few bullets. We have few men. We cannot win a war of guns." "Then what?" Tala asked. "We will confront him," Nantan said. "We will meet him when the sun rises. We will tell him this land is not his to take." He looked at Tala. "You speak the white man's tongue better than any of us. You learned it in the agency school before you ran away. You will be my voice." "Me?" Tala felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. "You will interpret," Nantan said. "You will look into his eyes and tell me if he is a man of honor or a man of greed. You will gauge him." Tala looked down at her hands. She hated the white tongue. It tasted like ash in her mouth. It was the language of the lies written on paper treaties. But she looked at the hollow cheeks of her sister's child sleeping nearby. "I will do it," she said. The warriors began to prepare. They applied streaks of ash and clay to their faces, not for war, but for power. They checked their weapons. Tala moved away from the fire to prepare herself. She checked the cinch on her pony. She checked the knife at her belt. She felt a strange tearing inside her. Duty demanded she hate this rancher. He was the enemy. He was the encroaching tide. But she remembered his hand resting gently on his horse's neck. She remembered the tobacco falling from his fingers. He was alone out there, just as they were alone up here. She shook her head, angry at the thought. Curiosity was dangerous. Sympathy was fatal. She hardened her heart, visualizing the confrontation to come. The sky to the east began to gray. The stars faded. "Ride," Nantan ordered. They mounted their horses, a line of shadows moving silently out of the high valley, descending toward the canyon where Jake Monroe slept, unaware that the dawn would bring not just the sun, but a reckoning that would shatter his world. The wind picked up again, howling through the stone needles, sounding like a warning that no one would hear until it was too late. The dawn broke not with a gentle unfolding of light, but with a hard, gray clarity that exposed every crack in the canyon walls. The air was already warming, promising another day of relentless heat. Jake Monroe rode at the flank of the small herd. His bandana pulled up over his nose to filter the alkali dust that the cattle kicked up in choking clouds. The drive was going slow. The steers were nervous. In the tight confines of the canyon, the sound of their hooves echoed off the vertical red stone, magnifying the noise into a chaotic rumble. The animals rolled their eyes, tossing their horns, sensing that they were trapped in a chute of rock. "Keep them moving," Jake shouted over the din. His voice was muffled by the cloth. "Do not let them bunch up against the wall." Caleb, riding point, waved his hat, shouting a high-pitched yip to turn a stray steer. Silas brought up the rear, his face a mask of grime and irritation. They had been pushing for 2 hours, and they were deep in the throat of the canyon now. The walls rose 300 feet on either side, sheer and unforgiving. Jake felt a prickle of unease that had nothing to do with the cattle. It was the terrain. It was a soldier's nightmare. A defile where the high ground belonged to God and anyone with a rifle who cared to climb. He scanned the rim, squinting against the brightening sky. Movement. It was so slight he almost missed it, a shifting shadow against the sun. Then, another. "Hold up!" Jake yelled, raising a hand. Silas rode up beside him, his horse dancing nervously. "What is it? Boss, look up," Jake said quietly. Silas craned his neck. His face went pale beneath the dirt. Lord Almighty. Along the ridges, silhouetted against the morning light, were riders. They sat motionless on their ponies, statues carved from the same hard earth as the mesas. There were perhaps a dozen of them, spread out in a line that commanded the entire length of the pass, but the real threat was ahead, blocking the narrow trail. Standing shoulder to shoulder with a stone were 4 riders, They held the center of the wash, cutting off any forward progress. Jake's hand moved instinctively to the Winchester scabbard under his leg. His heart slammed against his ribs, a heavy, dull thudding that drowned out the lowing of the cattle. The sensation was immediate and sickeningly familiar. The cold sweat of the picket line, the sudden realization that the enemy was not miles away, but right on top of you. "Don't!" a voice rang out. It was a woman's voice, clear and sharp as cracked glass. Jake froze. He looked at the group blocking the path. A woman sat on a paint pony, slightly ahead of the others. Beside her was an old man with white hair, wrapped in a blanket despite the heat. Jake slowly moved his hand away from the rifle. He looked at Silas and Caleb. Caleb had his Colt drawn, his hand shaking so bad he was liable to shoot his own foot. "Put it away, Caleb," Jake ordered, his voice low and dangerous. "But they are." "Put it away," Jake snapped. "Look at the ridges. If we fire a shot, we are dead men before the casing hits the ground. This is a kill box." Caleb swallowed hard and holstered the pistol. Silas kept his hand on his saddle horn, his knuckles white, spitting tobacco juice onto the sand in a gesture of defiance that looked pitifully small. Jake nudged his bay forward, riding alone toward the line of Apache blocking the way. He stopped 10 yards from them. The dust settled around them, creating a heavy silence. The woman, Tala, watched him. Her eyes were dark, unreadable, scanning him for any sign of treachery. She saw the way he sat in the saddle, rigid but controlled. She saw the way his eyes flicked to the cliffs and back, assessing the odds. "You go no further, rancher?" Tala said. Her English was accented but precise, the words chosen with care. Jake looked at her, then at the old man beside her. "I am just moving cattle. Ma'am, I am not looking for a fight. You are trespassing," she said. "This is not open range." Jake frowned. "I own this land. I have the deed." He reached for his saddlebag. A ripple of tension went through the warriors on the ridge. Bows were drawn taut, and the click of a rifle hammer echoed from the rocks. Jake moved slowly, telegraphing his actions. He pulled out a folded sheaf of papers, the corners worn soft. He held it up. "I bought the title from the territory office in Prescott. My line runs from the creek bed to the north ridge. This canyon is part of it." Tala did not even look at the paper. Her jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in her cheek. "Paper," she said, spitting the word like it was a curse. "Paper burns. Paper lies." She turned to the old man, Nantan, and spoke rapidly in her own tongue. The language was fluid, guttural, and rhythmic. Nantan listened, his face impassive, his eyes fixed on Jake with a weight that felt heavier than the stone walls. When Nantan spoke, his voice was like dry leaves scraping over rock. He spoke for a long time, gesturing with a withered hand toward the canyon walls, the sky, and the ground beneath the cattle's hooves. Tala turned back to Jake. "He says you speak of buying the wind," she translated. "He says you hold a paper that claims you own the shadows of the ancestors." Jake shifted in his saddle. "I do not want the shadows. I just want the road. I need to get these steers to market." "This is not a road for cattle," Tala said, her voice rising. "Nantan says this path was cut by the feet of our people before your grandfathers were born. It is the vein that connects us to our kin in the south. It is the way we travel to the winter grounds." She pointed to a darker stain on the canyon wall, high up near a cave entrance. "Do you see that?" she asked. Jake looked. It looked like smoke damage. "That is where the soldiers cornered the mothers and children 12 winters ago." She said, "The rocks still scream if you listen. This ground has drunk enough blood. We will not let you trample it with your beasts." Jake felt a cold chill slide down his spine. He looked at the spot she pointed to. He knew about the campaigns against the Apache. He had been part of units that chased shadows through these mountains, though he told himself he had never fired on women. But he knew men who had. Silas rode up closer, unable to hold his tongue. "This is a public territory," he shouted, his voice cracking. "We got rights. You people lost this land when you started raiding." "Silence," Jake roared, spinning his horse to face his hand. The warriors on the ridge shifted, An arrow skittered down the cliff face, landing with a clatter near Caleb's horse. The boy yelped. Jake turned back to Tala and Nantan. His face was flushed, sweat stinging his eyes. "My man speaks out of turn," Jake said, "but the fact remains, I have put everything I have into this ranch. Without this route, my cattle will starve on the salt flats. I cannot go back. You cannot go forward," Tala said. They stared at each other. The impasse was physical and absolute. Jake looked at Nantan. The old man was looking at him with a strange intensity. Nantan said something short to Tala. He asks what you are. Tala said, "You wear the clothes of a rancher, but you sit your horse like a soldier." He asks if you are a bluecoat. Jake looked down at his hands, watching the reins twist in his leather gloves. The lie sat on his tongue, easy and safe, but something in the old man's gaze made it impossible to speak it. "I was," Jake said quietly, "a long time ago." A murmur went through the Apache ranks. The hatred in the air thickened, becoming almost breathable. "But I put the uniform down," Jake added quickly. Looking directly at Tala, "I put it down because I was tired of burying people. I came here to build, not to kill." Tala studied his face. She saw the way he worried the brim of his hat, a nervous tick. She saw the shame that flickered in his eyes, a gray, hollow look that she had seen in the faces of her own people when they could not feed their children. He was afraid. Yes, but he was also heavy with something else. "He tells the truth about the uniform," Tala said to Nantan, "and he carries ghosts." Nantan nodded slowly. He spoke again. "The elder says the road is closed to you today." Tala interpreted. "If you try to push these cattle through, we will kill them, and then we will kill you." Jake looked at the rifles on the ridge. He looked at his two terrified cow hands. He looked at the cattle, ribs showing through their hides. "But," Tala continued, her voice softening just a fraction, "Nantan sees that you did not shoot when you could have. You held your men back because of this. We will not kill you now. Turn your herd around." Jake felt the bitterness of defeat in his mouth. Turning around meant days of brutal travel. It meant losing more stock. It meant failure. "I cannot just walk away," Jake said. "This is my land." "Then you will die on it," Tala said simply. The silence stretched. A hawk screeched high above, circling in the updraft. Jake took a deep breath. He pulled his hat tighter. "I will turn back," he said, "for today. But I am not giving up this claim. I want to talk, without guns. I want to meet with him again." He nodded at Nantan. Tala relayed the message. Nantan looked at Jake for a long moment, then gave a single, curt nod. "We will watch you," Tala said. "Do not think you are unseen because the sun goes down." She wheeled her horse around. With a sharp cry, the Apache riders turned and vanished into the labyrinth of the canyon as quickly as they had appeared. The warriors on the ridges melted back into the stone, leaving only the empty sky. The ride back to the ranch was a funeral procession. The cattle were exhausted, confused by the turnaround, and difficult to manage. The heat of the day bore down on them with vindictive force. Silas did not speak for the first hour. He rode with his back stiff, anger radiating off him like heat waves. When they finally stopped to water the horses at a muddy depression in the creek bed, he exploded. "You let them walk all over us? Jake!" Jake dismounted, loosening the cinch on his saddle. He did not look up. "I kept you alive." "Silas, alive?" Silas spat on the ground. "You shamed us. We had the law. We had the paper. You let a bunch of savages dictate where a white man can ride on his own property?" Jake turned slowly. His eyes were hard. "Look around you. Silas, look at that canyon. You think a piece of paper stops a bullet? You think the law matters when you are caught in a crossfire with 12 rifles looking down your throat?" "We should have fought," Caleb chimed in, though his voice trembled. "If we would have shot one, the rest might have scattered. You are a fool." "Son," Jake said, his voice flat, "they are Apache. They do not scatter. They swarm. And while you were fumbling for that pistol, they would have put 3 arrows in your chest." Silas kicked at a rock. "Word will get out. They will talk in town. They will say Jake Monroe is soft. They will say he is scared of Indians. Let them talk, Jake snapped. He walked over to Silas, stepping close enough that the older man had to step back. I have seen enough death. Silas, I have seen fields covered in it. I have seen men holding their own guts in their hands, crying for water. I have seen villages burned so hot the ground turned to glass. I have enough blood on my soul to drown this whole territory. I am not adding to it over a cattle trail if I can help it. He stared Silas down until the cowhand looked away. From now on, Jake said, his voice dropping to a command. No one goes near that canyon without my say-so. If I catch either of you riding that line, you can pack your bedrolls. Am I clear? Clear, boss, Caleb whispered. Silas just grunted, turning to mount his horse, his face sour with resentment. In the high camp, the mood was equally dark. The warriors sat in the shade of a twisted juniper, sharpening knives that were already razor-edged. Ka, the young warrior who had wanted to attack the night before, paced back and forth like a caged mountain lion. We should have taken the cattle, Ka argued, his voice echoing off the rock walls. The people are hungry. There were 30 steers, fat enough to feed us for a moon. They were skin and bone, Tala said, sitting near Nantan. And if we had taken them, the soldiers would be riding out of Fort Verde by tomorrow. Let them come, Ka shouted. I am tired of hiding in holes like a rabbit. This is our land. Nantan sat calmly, whittling a piece of ironwood. His hands were steady. War is not just courage. Ka, the old man said. It is wisdom. We struck the rancher with fear today. That is a weapon that lasts longer than a bullet. He is weak, Ka sneered. Did you see him? He held a paper like a shield. He is a coward. He did not shoot, Tala said quietly. Because he was afraid. Ka turned on her. You look at him with soft eyes. Tala, you speak his tongue and you forget your own blood. Tala stood up, her eyes flashing. I forget nothing. I washed the body of my husband when the soldiers returned him to us with a hole in his back. I buried my sister when the fever took her. My hatred is as deep as the roots of the mountains. She stepped closer to Ka, her voice dropping to a hiss. But dead warriors do not feed children, and a war with this rancher will bring the whole territory down on us. If there is a way to survive without dying, I will look for it, even if it means talking to a white man. Ka stared at her, his chest heaving. Then he spat at her feet and stormed off toward the horse line. Tala sat back down, trembling. She felt the eyes of the other women on her. Some looked at her with sympathy, others with the same suspicion Ka held. She felt the weight of it, the crushing expectation to be strong, to be unyielding, to be the vessel of their collective anger. She walked away from the camp, climbing a narrow deer trail to a solitary ridge. She sat there, hugging her knees to her chest. She thought of her husband, Chaitan. He had been a laugher, a man who sang to the rising sun. The soldiers had killed him 3 winters ago, not in battle, but while he was hunting. They said it was a mistake. Since then, she had worn her hatred like a heavy blanket. It kept her warm. It kept her safe. It made the world simple, us and them. But today, in the canyon, the world had not been simple. She remembered the rancher's face. Jake. She remembered the way his hand had trembled, not with the shaking of a coward, but with the vibration of a man holding back a scream. She had seen the way he looked at Nantan, with a strange, reluctant reverence. He respected us, she whispered to the wind. It unsettled her. It was easier to kill a monster than a man. It was easier to hate a uniform than a person who admitted he was tired of death. She resented him for it. She wanted him to be like the others, cruel, loud, stupid. By being human, he made her task impossible. 2 days later, Jake rode into town. He left Silas and Caleb at the ranch, not trusting them to keep their mouths shut in the saloon. The town felt even colder than before. News traveled fast in the desert, carried on the wind or perhaps by the very dust itself. As he tied his horse at the hitching post, he felt eyes on him. He walked into the law office. The sheriff, a thick-set man named Miller with a walrus mustache and a perpetual sweat stain on his collar, was cleaning a shotgun. Henry Barstow was sitting in the corner, reading a newspaper. his polished boots resting on a chair. "Well, if it isn't the Indian fighter," Barstow drawled. Not looking up, Jake ignored him and looked at Miller. "Sheriff, I need to talk about the northern boundary." Miller sighed, snapping the shotgun closed. "I heard you had a little run-in." "Jake, I was blocked on my own land," Jake said. "Armed men. They threatened my life and my stock." "Apache?" Miller asked. "Yes, led by an old man and a woman." Miller chuckled darkly. "That would be Nantan. And the girl, likely Tala. She is a firebrand. Went to the mission school for a few years before she turned wild again. Dangerous bunch. I want to know my options." Jake said, "I have the deed. The law says that land is mine." The sheriff leaned back, his chair creaking. "The law says a lot of things. Jake, the law says you own the rocks and the dirt. But the law does not stand out there in the canyon with a badge. So you will do nothing." "I can ride out there with a posse," Miller said. "We can shoot a few of them, maybe scare them off, but they will come back. And when they do, they will burn your barn and maybe scalp you while you sleep." Barstow folded his newspaper. "You see, Jake," Barstow said, standing up, "this is what I was telling you. That land is worthless as long as the Apache claim it. It is a liability." Jake looked at him. "You are enjoying this." "Henry, I am a businessman," Barstow said, spreading his hands. "I deal in realities." "The reality is, you have an Indian problem. Now, if you were to sell, I have investors who could afford to bring in a private security force. Men who know how to clear the brush. Clear the brush," Jake repeated, his voice cold. "You mean slaughter them?" Barstow smiled thinly. "I mean secure the asset." Miller scratched his chin. "Listen, Jake, if you want to keep the ranch, you gotta show strength. You cannot let them push you. If you need to fire a few warning shots next time, well, the law understands self-defense. Warning shots." Jake said, "You think a warning shot stops a war? It starts one." He looked from the sheriff to Barstow. He saw the indifference in their eyes. To them, the Apache were not people. They were varmints, like coyotes or wolves, to be exterminated so commerce could flow. Jake felt a sudden, suffocating sense of entrapment. He had the paper. He had the right. But the only way to enforce that right was to become the very thing he had run away from, a killer of the desperate. He walked out of the office without another word. The bright sun hit him like a hammer. He stood on the boardwalk, feeling the dust settle on his clothes. He was alone. The town was against him. The tribe was against him. And the land just waited to see who would bleed first. The ride home was long. Jake let the horse pick its way through the mesquite, his mind churning. He thought about just packing up, leaving, letting Barstow have it, letting the bank take the loss. But then he thought of the corn struggling in the dust. He thought of the hours he had spent hammering boards, the nights he had spent dreaming of a home. If he ran now, he would run forever. He reached the ranch at sunset. He did not go to the house. Instead, he rode up to the high ridge that overlooked the valley. To the west, the sun was sinking behind the jagged silhouette of the mountains, turning the sky into a bruised canvas of violet and red. Below him, his ranch looked small and fragile, a tiny speck of human endeavor in a vast, indifferent wilderness. To the north lay the dark mouth of the canyon, shadowed and foreboding. Jake sat there, letting the wind cool the sweat on his neck. Then he saw it. On the opposite ridge, perhaps half a mile away across the broken ground, was a figure, a rider on a paint horse. He squinted. It was her, Tala. She was watching him. She sat motionless, a silhouette against the dying light. She was too far away to see her face, but he could feel her gaze. It was not the predatory stare of a hunter, nor the casual glance of a passerby. It was a witness. She was checking to see if he was still there. If he had run. Jake straightened in his saddle. He did not wave. He did not reach for his rifle. He simply sat there, letting her see him, letting her see that he had not fled. Across the distance, Tala watched the rancher. She saw him etched against the sky, a solitary figure who refused to disappear. She felt a strange tightening in her chest, fear, anger, and something that felt dangerously like respect. They stayed there for a long time, two specks of life separated by a canyon of silence and a century of blood. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first star appeared, hanging bright and cold above them. In that wordless exchange, a contract was signed. They were bound now, not by friendship, not by treaty, but by the shared, terrible knowledge that they were the only two people who understood what was at stake. Jake turned his horse first, descending into the darkness of his valley. A moment later, Tala turned, fading into the night of her hills. The wind swept over the ridge where they had stood, erasing their tracks in the dust. But the tension remained, vibrating in the earth like a coming storm. The weeks that followed the confrontation in the canyon settled over the territory like a shroud of heavy, suffocating wool. The heat did not break. If anything, it intensified, baking the moisture out of the earth until the ground cracked open in jagged fissures that looked like thirsty mouths. Jake Monroe kept his word. He stayed away from the canyon. Instead, he drove his dwindling herd along the southern perimeter, a route that was a cruel joke of geography. It forced the cattle over broken basalt fields where sharp rocks sliced hooves and through sparse, thorny scrublands where the grass was little more than gray stubble. Every day was a calculation of loss. Jake rode with a handkerchief tied over his face to filter the dust, his eyes stinging and red-rimmed. He watched the flanks of his steers hollow out, their ribs pressing against their hides like the staves of a barrel. He watched a calf stumble and refuse to rise, its tongue lolling out, black and swollen. He had to shoot it to end its misery, the crack of the pistol sounding flat and small in the immense silence of the desert. Back at the ranch, the mood was poisonous. The water level in the main well dropped 2 feet in 10 days. The pump groaned and rattled, coughing up sand with every stroke. "This is a fool's errand," Silas muttered one evening, scraping the last of the beans from his tin plate. "We are pushing these animals to death to avoid a fight that we should have finished." Jake ignored him, staring into the embers of the fire. He was too tired to argue. He went inside the house and sat at his table, opening the ledger. The pages were filled with his cramped handwriting, columns of expenses that grew longer and columns of income that remained stubbornly empty. He dipped his pen in ink and did the math. He had enough grain for 3 weeks. He had enough money for wages for maybe 4, if he didn't eat. Bankruptcy was not a distant threat anymore. It was sitting in the chair across from him, waiting. He rubbed his temples, feeling the throb of a headache that had not left him since the day in the canyon. He closed his eyes and saw the red walls, the cool shadows he was forbidden to enter. It was right there, salvation, water, a straight path, and he could not take it. In the hidden valley of the high mesas, the Apache were dying by inches. The deer had moved north, seeking water in the higher elevations where the tribe could not follow without crossing into heavy patrol zones. The small game, rabbits, squirrels, seemed to have vanished into the earth. Tala walked through the camp, her heart heavy. She saw an elder, a man who had once been a great hunter, shivering under a thin blanket despite the heat. His chest rattled with a wet, deep cough that sounded like death approaching. She went to the ration distribution site 2 days' ride away, hoping for the government beef that was promised by treaty. She returned with a single sack of flour that smelled of mold and a side of beef that was already green with rot. The agent had shrugged, spitting on the ground. "Take it or leave it. The wagon broke down. That is all there is." She had ridden back in a fury, tears of rage drying on her face before they could fall. When she threw the rotten meat on the ground before Nantan, the old man just looked at it with weary resignation. "They mean for us to die." "Tala," he said softly, "they do not need bullets if they have hunger." "We must move," a younger warrior urged. "We must go back to the old way, raid the settlements, take the cattle, and bring the soldiers down on us," Nantan asked. "No, we wait. The rains will come." But the rains did not come. The sky remained a brilliant, empty blue. mocking them. It was during the third week of this slow strangulation that Jake rode out to check the boundary line near the eastern cliffs. There was a small spring there, tucked into a fold of the rock. It was usually choked with silt and debris, offering nothing but a patch of damp mud. Jake dismounted, leading his horse, hoping to find enough moisture to wet the animal's muzzle. He stopped, blinking in surprise. The spring was clear. The mud and dead leaves had been scooped out. Flat stones had been carefully arranged around the basin, creating a deep, clean pool where water bubbled up, cool and sweet. A small channel had been dug to let the overflow run down to a patch of grass that was shockingly green against the red dust. Jake knelt, dipping his hand into the water. It was cold. It was life. He looked around. The work had been done by hand, and recently, he scanned the soft dirt near the edge of the pool. There, pressed faintly into the mud, was the print of a moccasin. Small, precise. Tala. She had been here. Her people had been here. They had cleaned the spring, his spring, technically, to keep the water flowing. It was a pragmatic act, he knew. The land needed water to support the game they hunted, but they had left the stones arranged in a way that kept the pool deep enough for a horse. They helped the land, Jake whispered. He stood up, looking toward the cliffs where he knew they watched him. He felt a sudden, overwhelming surge of gratitude that was almost painful. In a world that seemed bent on crushing him, someone had fixed a spring. He went to his saddlebag. He had precious little supplies, but he took out a small sack of coffee beans and a bag of white flour. It was half his rations for the week. He placed the items on a flat rock near the water. He did not leave a note. He did not know what he would say. He just set them down, a silent offering of thanks, and rode away without looking back. 2 hours later, Tala emerged from the scrub oak. She had watched him leave. She approached the spring cautiously, her rifle ready. She saw the sacks. She picked up the flour. It was heavy, good quality. She smelled the coffee beans through the burlap. Her mouth watered. Coffee was a luxury they had not seen in months. She felt a spike of irritation. Did he think he could buy them? Did he think a bag of flour paid for the land he occupied? But then she looked at the stones she had arranged. She looked at the water. She realized he had understood the message of the spring, that the water belonged to the earth, not to the deed holder, and he was answering in kind. She tucked the sacks into her carrying pouch. Usefulness outweighed pride, but as she walked back to the camp, the irritation sat side by side with a reluctant warmth. He was paying attention. That was dangerous. The danger arrived at the ranch 3 days later, not in the form of an Apache arrow, but in a polished black buggy driven by Henry Barstow. Jake was in the corral, trying to shoe a mare that was spooky from the heat. He saw the dust cloud first, then the gleam of the varnished wood. He dropped the hoof and wiped his hands on his trousers. Walking to the gate as Barstow pulled up. "Henry," Jake said, not offering a hand, "you are a long way from the saloon." Barstow stepped down, dusting off his immaculate gray suit. He looked at the dilapidated barn, the leaning fence, and finally at Jake's sweat-stained shirt. "I have been to the capital. Jake, big things are moving." "Is that so?" Barstow leaned against the buggy, lighting a cigar. He offered one to Jake, who declined. "The Railroad Commission is finalizing the route for a new spur, and there is talk of a stagecoach line connecting directly to Santa Fe. They need a station, a hub, and they want the most direct route through the basin." Barstow pointed with his cigar toward the north. "They want the canyon." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "The canyon. I told you, Henry, that land is not for sale." Barstow sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. "Listen to me. Monroe, I am trying to help you. I know you are drowning. I know the bank is ready to call your note. I am offering you a lifeline. I will buy the ranch. All of it. The price will clear your debt and leave you with a little something in your pocket. You can walk away." "And what about the Apache?" Jake asked quietly. Barstow waved his hand dismissively. "That is why the price is adjusted. The investors know there is an Indian problem. But once we own the land, once the railroad puts its weight behind it, the army will clear that canyon out in a week. They will build a fort if they have to. Those savages will be gone or dead." Jake looked at the man. He saw the casual cruelty in Barstow's soft face. To him, the canyon was just a line on a map, and the people living there were just obstacles to be bulldozed. "Get off my land," Jake said. Barstow froze, the cigar halfway to his mouth. "Excuse me? I said get off my land. I am not selling to you. I am not selling to the railroad, and I am not going to let you turn this valley into a slaughterhouse so you can line your pockets." Barstow's face hardened. The pleasant veneer cracked. "You are a fool. Monroe, you are protecting people who would cut your throat for a blanket." "I am protecting my home," Jake said, stepping closer. Barstow climbed back into the buggy. He picked up the whip. "You will regret this. Jake, when the town hears you are standing in the way of progress to coddle a bunch of hostiles, well, people get angry. Accidents happen." He snapped the whip, and the buggy lurched forward, spinning a cloud of dust into Jake's face. Jake watched him go, feeling a cold dread settle in his gut. He had just declared war. The poison spread quickly. The next time Jake rode into town for nails, the silence was deafening. Men turned their backs when he walked by. The shopkeeper, Mr. Henderson, claimed he was out of stock on items that Jake could see sitting on the shelves behind the counter. "I heard you are making deals with Nantan," a voice said from the shadows of the livery stable. Jake turned. It was a local rancher, a man named Davis who had lost cattle to raiders years ago. "I am minding my own business." "Davis," Jake said, "Barstow says you are letting them camp on your land, says you are feeding them, says you are planning something together." "That is a lie," Jake said. "Is it?" Davis stepped into the light, his hand near his gun. "You were a soldier. Monroe, you should know better. You pick a side. If you pick the wrong one, you go down with them." Jake walked away, his heart hammering. Barstow was not just applying pressure. He was painting a target on Jake's back. He was using fear, the oldest, most potent weapon in the West, to isolate him. That evening, the air was heavy with static. Thunderheads were building in the south, massive towers of bruised purple that flickered with internal lightning. Jake walked the perimeter fence near the canyon entrance. He needed to clear his head. He needed to think. He saw the movement in the brush before he heard it. He stopped, his hand dropping to his Colt. "It is me," a voice called out softly. Jake hesitated, then lowered his hand. "Come out." Tala stepped from the shadows of the mesquite. She moved like a ghost, silent and fluid. She stopped 10 feet from the fence line. The barbed wire stood between them, a jagged line against the twilight. "You left flour," she said. "You fixed the spring." He replied. Tala looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face in the fading light. "It was not a gift," she said sharply. "The land dies if the water is blocked. We did it for the earth." "I know," Jake said, "but I thank you anyway. The coffee, was that for the earth too?" A flicker of a smile, almost imperceptible, touched her lips before she suppressed it. The coffee was good. Nantan enjoyed it. They stood there in silence for a moment. The wind picked up, rustling the dry cornstalks in the distance. It blew a strand of black hair across Tala's face. She brushed it away with a rough, impatient gesture. "Why do you stay?" she asked suddenly. "You are starving here. Your cattle are bones. The town hates you. Why do you not leave?" Jake looked out at the darkened shape of his house. "I have nowhere else to go," he said. "I spent 10 years destroying things. Tala, I burned farms. I burned houses. When the war ended, I had nothing but ghosts. This dirt, these rocks. It is the first thing I have tried to build. If I leave, I am just a drifter again, and I am too tired to drift." Tala listened, her expression softening. "My husband, Chaitan," she said quietly. "He wanted to build too. He wanted to raise horses in the low valley. He said the time of fighting was over. He said we could live alongside the whites if they would just let us breathe." "What happened to him?" Jake asked, though he knew the answer. "Soldiers," she said. They came while he was hunting. They said he had a stolen rifle. It was his father's rifle. They shot him in the back. Jake gripped the fence post, the rough wood biting into his palm. "I am sorry. Sorry does not bring him back," she said, "but—" "Thank you." She looked at him then, really looked at him. She saw the lines of fatigue around his eyes, the gray in his beard, the loneliness that hung off him like a coat. He saw the grief she carried, the fierce, exhausted determination in her posture. They were two shipwrecks on the same shore. The wind gusted again, stronger this time. It whipped Tala's hair across her face again, blinding her for a second. Without thinking, Jake reached out. He lifted his hand as if to brush the hair from her cheek. His fingers hovered inches from the wire, inches from her face. Tala froze. She did not pull away. She watched his hand. Her breath hitched. For a heartbeat. The world narrowed down to the space between his fingers and her skin. Jake felt a longing so sharp it knocked the wind out of him. It wasn't just desire. It was a desperate need for connection, for softness in a world of hard edges. Crack! The sound of a gunshot rolled across the plains from the direction of the town. It was distant, but distinct. The spell shattered. Jake snatched his hand back. Tala stepped back, her eyes wide and alert. "They are starting," she said, her voice tight. "Who?" "Barstow," she said. "He talks of soldiers. He talks of clearing the canyon. He will not stop with your ranch. Jake, he wants it all." She looked at him one last time, her eyes fierce. "If the soldiers come, we will fight, and if you stand with them, I will have to kill you." "I will not stand with them," Jake said. "Then do not stand in the middle," she warned. "The middle is where you get crushed." She turned and vanished into the darkness, leaving Jake alone with the wire and the wind, the violence. When it came, was stupid and drunken. 2 nights later, a group of cowboys from the Double R spread, men who owed money to Barstow and drank at his expense, rode out from town. They were liquored up and looking for sport. They rode along the ridge overlooking the Apache camp. They did not have the courage to attack, but they had enough whiskey to be cruel. "Wake 'em up," one shouted. They fired their pistols into the air, whooping and hollering. The shots echoed like thunder in the canyon. In the camp below, panic erupted. Mothers grabbed children, diving for the cover of the rocks. Warriors scrambled for weapons in the dark. One of the cowboys, laughing, lowered his aim and fired blindly into the shadows of the shelters. A cry went up. Not a war cry, but the high, thin scream of a child. "Let's ride!" the cowboy yelled, and they spurred their horses, galloping away into the night, leaving dust and tragedy in their wake. Tala ran to the shelter where the scream had come from. A young boy, no more than 8, was clutching his arm. Blood seeped between his fingers. It was a flesh wound, a graze, but the bullet had torn the muscle. Nantan was there in seconds, examining the wound. "Is he alive?" Tala asked, her voice trembling with rage. "He lives," Nantan said. "The bone is whole, but the spirit of the camp is broken. Around them, the warriors were gathering. Ka was there, his chest heaving, a rifle in his hand. "They shoot children," Ka screamed. "We cannot wait. We must kill them all. Burn the town. Kill the rancher. Hold," Nantan commanded. Standing up, his voice was frail but carried the weight of iron. "They want us to attack," Nantan said. "Do you not see? If we ride into town tonight, we give them the excuse they need. The army will come with cannons. We will all die." "They shot my nephew," Ka roared. "And if you ride now, your nephew will have no father," Nantan snapped. He turned to the group. "We will double the sentries. We will move the women and children to the caves, but we will not strike. Not yet." Ka turned his furious gaze on Tala. "This is your doing," he spat. "You talk with the rancher, you make him feel safe, and his people come and shoot us for sport. You have made us weak." "Tala." Tala felt the accusation like a slap. "I did not. You treat with the enemy," Ka shouted, "and the enemy laughs while we bleed." He turned and stalked away. Tala stood there, looking at the crying boy. She felt a deep, gnawing guilt in her belly. Was Ka right? Had her hesitation, her curiosity about Jake, emboldened them? She looked at the blood on her hands, the boy's blood, and felt sick. News of the shooting reached the ranch the next morning. Silas had ridden into town early and came back pale. They shot a kid. "Boss," Silas said, standing on the porch, "the Double R boys. They were bragging about it in the street. Said they tagged a little buck." Jake felt a cold rage settle over him. It was Barstow. It had to be. He was winding them up, pushing and pushing until something snapped. "He is starting a war," Jake said quietly. He looked toward the canyon. He knew what was happening up there. He knew the rage that must be boiling over. And he knew that if the Apache retaliated, Barstow would get exactly what he wanted. A massacre that would clear the title to the land. And Tala, if the army came, they wouldn't care who she was. They wouldn't care that she had fixed a spring or saved his life by holding her fire. She would be just another target. Jake walked to the edge of the porch. He looked at his hands. They were calloused, scarred, made for work. But they were shaking. He could pack up. He could leave today. He could let Barstow have the land. Let the railroad come. Let history roll over the Apache like it always did. It was the smart play. It was the survivor's play. But he remembered the look in Tala's eyes through the fence. The middle is where you get crushed. "No," Jake said. "What?" Silas asked. "I am not leaving," Jake said. "And I'm not letting them start this war." He turned to Silas. "Load the wagon. Everything we have. We leaving?" "No, we are digging in." "And Silas, clean your rifle." That night, Jake did not sleep. He sat on the porch, his gun in his lap, watching the dark mouth of the canyon. He knew he had to do something impossible. He had to stand between a town that hated him and a tribe that didn't trust him. He had to be the wall that stopped the fire. Miles away, on the edge of the high mesa, Tala knelt in the dirt. She had cleaned the boy's wound and sung him to sleep. Now she was alone. She prayed to the spirits of the ancestors, her voice a low murmur in the wind. She asked for strength. She asked for clarity. But as she prayed, her mind wandered. She saw the rancher's face. She felt the ghost of his hand near her cheek. She saw the pain in his eyes when he spoke of his dead wife. "He is not the enemy," she whispered, the words feeling like treason. But he was on the other side of the wire, and the storm was coming for them both. She looked up at the stars, cold and distant, and wondered if there was any path through this darkness that did not end in a grave. The heat in town had taken on a new, ugly weight. It was no longer just the sun beating down on the dust. It was the pressure of impending violence, thick as smoke in a burning room. Henry Barstow stood on the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office, his thumbs hooked into his vest, watching the men gather. He had done his work well. The sheriff, Miller, looked uncomfortable in his own skin, shifting his weight from one foot to the other as he addressed the crowd of 20 men. They were not deputies. They were ranch hands, drifters, and shopkeepers who had been fed a steady diet of fear and whiskey. Barstow called them a protective posse. Jake Monroe, watching from the shadow of the livery stable across the street, knew them for what they were, a lynch mob looking for a target. "We are just going to ride the perimeter," Miller said, his voice lacking conviction. "We are going to show the flag. Let them know we are watching. We are not looking to start a war today, but we are ready if one starts." A voice shouted from the back. Barstow nodded, his face solemn but his eyes bright with satisfaction. "It is about safety, gentlemen. Protecting our homes. Protecting our women." He spotted Jake in the shadows and raised a hand. "Monroe, you coming? We are riding out to secure the range." "A man with your experience would be an asset." The crowd turned, 40 eyes fixing on Jake. The accusation was silent but loud. "Are you with us, or are you with them?" Jake stepped into the sunlight, his hand resting near his hip, though he had not drawn his weapon. "I am not riding with you. Henry, that is not a patrol. That is a stick poking a hornet nest. You go out there looking for trouble, you will find it, and when you do not come running to my ranch for cover." A murmur of disgust went through the men. "Coward," someone muttered. "Indian lover?" another whispered, loud enough to be heard. Jake held Barstow's gaze. The speculator just smiled, a thin, predatory curing of his lips. Suit yourself, Jake, but when the arrows start flying, remember you chose to stand alone. The posse mounted up, a chaotic jingle of spurs and creaking leather. They rode out in a cloud of dust, heading north toward the canyon. Jake watched them go, a sick feeling twisting in his gut. They were not going to protect anything. They were going to ensure that peace became impossible. The sun was high when the posse reached the edge of the Apache territory. They did not enter the deep canyon. Even the drunkest among them had enough sense to fear the high walls. But they rode aggressively along the ridge that overlooked the lower camp. They shouted insults into the wind, firing pistols at the rocks. They rode their horses through a small, outlying gathering spot where the Apache women often collected mesquite beans. They trampled the drying racks, shattering the wood. They kicked apart a fire circle, scattering the cold ashes. And one rider urinated on the blackened stones while his companions laughed. It was a petty, small act of desecration. But in a land where survival depended on respect for the scarce resources, it was a message louder than a cannon shot. We are here, and you are nothing. They turned back before the warriors could descend from the high caves, satisfied with their display of dominance. But the dust they left behind settled on a fuse that was already burned down to the nub. In the high camp, the atmosphere was electric with rage. Nantan stood in the center of the council circle, his face grim. The warriors were painting their faces, not for ceremony, but for death. Ka, the young firebrand, was pacing, his chest heaving with the need for violence. "They piss on our fires!" Ka shouted, striking his chest. "They break the drying racks of our mothers! Are we dogs, to be kicked and do nothing? We cannot wait to be hunted!" Another warrior agreed, checking the fletching on his arrows. "We must strike the head of the snake! Strike the ranch!" Ka demanded. "The white man Monroe is the gateway. He sits on the root. We burn him out. We kill him. And we send his head back to the town. Then they will know fear. No!" Tala stepped into the circle. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the masculine roar of the council. "You strike the rancher, and you give them exactly what they want," she argued, her eyes blazing. "That man Barstow wants a war. He wants the soldiers to come so he can take the land for the railroad. If you kill Monroe, you sign the death warrant for every child in this camp. He is one of them." Ka spat. "He is a white man. He takes our water. He blocks our path. He left flour when we starved." Tala countered. "He held his fire when he could have killed us in the canyon. He is not like the others. You defend him with too much fire. Woman," Ka sneered, stepping closer to her. His eyes narrowed. "Perhaps you have forgotten your husband. Perhaps you look at the rancher and see a man to warm your bed instead of an enemy." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Tala felt the sting of it, the heat rising in her cheeks. It burned because it was not entirely a lie. She did not want the rancher dead. She felt a pull toward him that she could not name, a connection forged in the silence of the desert. "I defend him because he is the only thing standing between us and the army," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. "He is a shield, not a target. If we break him, the flood comes." Nantan raised his hand. "Enough." The old man looked at his people. He saw the hunger in their bellies and the pride in their eyes. He knew that pride was a dangerous thing, but it was all they had left. "The rancher is a problem," Nantan said slowly. "But Ka is right. We cannot sit and wait for them to ride over us. We must do something." Before he could give the order, a sentry whistled from the rocks above, a single, sharp note that meant one rider approaching. Jake Monroe rode the bay horse up the steep incline toward the canyon entrance. He was alone. He had left his rifle in the scabbard at his saddle, but he had taken the belt with his Colt revolver off and hung it on the saddle horn. He rode with his hands clearly visible, resting on his thighs. He knew he was being watched. He could feel the eyes on him like physical touches. The skin between his shoulder blades itched, anticipating the impact of a bullet. Every instinct from his soldiering days screamed at him to turn around, to find cover, to fight, but he kept the horse moving at a walk. He reached the spot where the canyon widened into the bowl where the Apache were gathered. He saw the warriors lining the ridges. Arrows knocked. He saw the women watching from the shadows of the caves. He rode into the center of the clearing and stopped. He swung down from the saddle, moving slowly. He walked to the center of the open space and raised his empty hands. "I want to speak with Nantan," he called out. Ka dropped from a rock ledge, landing 10 feet away, a knife in his hand. He looked ready to spring. Jake did not flinch, though his heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Nantan emerged from the crowd, leaning on a staff of ironwood. Tala stood beside him, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear for him. "You come to a place of anger." "Rancher," Nantan said. His English was broken, but Tala did not need to interpret the menace in his tone. "Your men came here today. They insulted the earth." "They were not my men," Jake said loudly. So the others could hear. "They were men from the town. I refused to ride with them. I am here because I want to stop this before the ground drinks any more blood." "You talk," Ka hissed. "White men always talk." "I have a proposal," Jake said, looking directly at Nantan. "I know you need the canyon. It is your road. I know I need the water and the passage for my cattle." He took a breath. The air was thin and hot. "We share it," Jake said. Silence stretched across the camp. The concept was alien. In the territory, land was owned or it was taken. It was never shared. "I will keep the canyon open," Jake continued. "No fences across the trail. You keep your passage. You keep your trade route. In exchange, you let me move my herd through twice a year. Just passage. I will not build on the trail. I will not block the water." "And the other white men?" Nantan asked. "The ones who piss on our fires?" "I will keep them out," Jake promised. "It is my private land by law. I will post signs. I will ride the line myself. If they cross, they answer to me. I will stand between you and the town. It was a heavy promise." Jake knew it might kill him to keep it. Tala stepped forward. "Nantan, listen to him. This is the way. If we share the land, we keep the land. If we fight for all of it, we lose all of it." Nantan looked at Jake. He studied the rancher's face, looking for the lie. He saw fear, yes, but he also saw a desperate kind of integrity. "White promises are like rain in the desert," Nantan said. "They vanish before they touch the ground. Make a treaty with me," Jake said. "Not with paper, with words. Man to man," the warriors muttered. It was tempting. It was a chance to survive without the annihilation of a war with the army. Nantan seemed to waver, considering the offer. Then, a shout came from the northern trail. A runner burst into the clearing. He was a young man, his chest heaving, his legs streaked with dust and dried blood. He collapsed at Nantan's feet, gasping for air. Nantan knelt. "What is it?" The runner's voice was a croak, but in the silence of the canyon, it carried to everyone. "Ambush, the trading party, returning from the south." "What happened?" Tala cried out, rushing forward. "Gunmen!" The runner gasped. "Hidden in the rocks near the needle. They fired without warning. 2 are dead, Grey Wolf and Little Bear." "And the third?" Nantan asked, his voice shaking. "Missing? Taken? Who?" Ka roared. "Who did this?" The runner looked up, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. "White men. They rode shod horses. They laughed." The explosion of rage was immediate and terrifying. A collective howl of grief and fury went up from the gathered tribe. The women began to wail. The warriors drew their weapons. Ka spun around, his eyes locking on Jake. "Trickery!" Ka screamed. "He comes here with soft words to hold us still while his people slaughter us." "No!" Jake shouted. "Backing up! I knew nothing of this! Liar!" Ka launched himself at Jake. Jake tried to dodge, but another warrior struck him from behind with the butt of a rifle. He went down hard, the breath driven from his lungs. Boots and moccasins rained down on him. He curled into a ball, protecting his head. As the blows fell, he felt a rib crack. He felt the skin on his cheek split. The world dissolved into a blur of red dust and pain. "Stop!" The voice was not Tala's. It was Nantan's. The beating stopped, but the warriors stood over Jake, chests heaving, weapons raised to finish him. Jake lay in the dirt, blood pouring from his nose and a gash above his eye. He gasped for air, each breath a jagged knife in his chest. "He came unarmed," Nantan said, his voice cold but authoritative. "We do not kill messengers in the council circle." "He is a trap," Ka shouted, pointing his knife at Jake's throat. "He talks peace while they kill our brothers. I did not know." Jake wheezed, spitting blood into the dust. "Barstow," Tala said, her voice trembling. She stood over Jake, placing her body between him and Ka. "It was Barstow. He knew the trading party was out. He sent men to ambush them to make sure we killed the rancher. Do you not see? He wants us to kill him." Ka looked at her with disgust. "You choose him over your own blood?" "I choose the truth," Tala cried. "Look at him. Does he look like a man who planned a victory? He is alone." Nantan looked down at the battered rancher. He saw the confusion and the horror in Jake's eyes. "Bind him," Nantan ordered. "Put him in the brush shelter. If he is lying, he dies at sunrise. If he speaks truth, we will see." Rough hands hauled Jake to his feet. He stumbled, his vision swimming. He looked at Tala. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she did not look away. She nodded, once, a promise that she was not done fighting for him. Night fell over the canyon, heavy and suffocating. The sounds of mourning drifted through the camp, the low, rhythmic chanting for the dead. Jake lay on a pile of furs in a small, low-roofed shelter made of woven branches. His hands were tied behind his back. Every inch of his body ached. His left eye was swollen shut, and he could feel the grating of the broken rib every time he inhaled. The flap of the shelter opened. A figure slipped in, bringing the scent of sage and wood smoke. It was Tala. She carried a small bowl of water and a rag. She carried a knife at her belt. She knelt beside him. She did not speak at first. She cut the ropes binding his wrists, but signaled for him to stay still. "Turn," she whispered. Jake groaned as he shifted. She dipped the rag in the water and began to clean the dried blood from his face. Her touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence of the afternoon. When the cold water touched the gash on his forehead, he hissed, "Quiet," she murmured. "They are angry. If they hear you, they might remember you are here." "Why are you helping me?" Jake asked, his voice a rasp. "Because I know you did not kill them," she said, "and because—" She stopped. She moved the rag down to his neck, wiping away the grime. Her fingers brushed against his skin. She felt the heat of him, the pulse beating steadily in his throat. Jake looked at her. In the dim light filtering through the branches, her face was a landscape of grief and strength. He saw the tears she was holding back. "I am sorry about your people," Jake whispered. Tala's hand stilled on his shoulder. "It is a cycle," she said, her voice breaking. "Blood for blood. It never ends." "I know," Jake said. "I have lived it." He closed his good eye, the memories rising up unbidden. "I was at the Sand Creek campaign," he confessed, the words spilling out into the dark. "I was a soldier. I stood there and watched. I saw women running with babies in their arms. I saw men I knew, good men, turn into animals. They laughed while they burned the lodges." He opened his eyes, looking at her. "I can still hear the screaming. Tala, every night I wake up sweating, reaching for a gun to fight ghosts. That is why I came here. I thought if I could just build something quiet, I could drown out the noise." Tala listened, her hand resting on his chest, over his heart. She could feel the heavy thud of it. She looked at this man, this enemy, who carried the same wounds she did. He was not a monster. He was a mirror. "You are not that man anymore," she said softly. "I do not know." Jake said, "When I saw you today, standing there in front of the knife." He shifted, wincing, and reached out to take her hand. His fingers were rough. stained with earth and blood. He covered her hand with his. "You make me want to be different," Jake said. "When I look at you, I do not see the war. I see hope." Tala looked down at their joined hands. A tremulous sigh escaped her lips. She felt a surge of emotion so strong it frightened her. Compassion, yes, but beneath it, a fierce, aching attraction. It was a hunger to be held, to be known, to be comforted by the one person who understood the cost of survival. She leaned in. The space between them vanished. She could smell the dust on his clothes, the iron scent of blood, and the underlying warmth of the man. "Jake," she whispered. She looked at his mouth. He looked at hers. The air grew thick, charged with the electricity of forbidden things. Jake leaned forward, his pain forgotten for a second. But just as their breath mingled, Tala pulled back. She pulled her hand away as if burned. "We cannot," she said, her voice trembling. "Tala, no." She shook her head, tears finally spilling over. "If I cross this line, if we cross it, my people will cast me out. Your town will hang you. We are already standing on the edge of a cliff." Jake slumped back against the firs. He knew she was right, but the rejection of the moment hurt worse than the beating. "I am already unforgivable to them," Jake whispered. "Being near you, sitting here in the dirt, it is the first time in 10 years I have felt like I am actually alive, not just surviving. Alive." Tala looked at him, her heart breaking. She reached out and touched his cheek, a fleeting, desperate caress. "We are alive," she said, "but tomorrow we may be dead." The flap of the shelter was thrown open. Light flooded in. It was a scout, breathing hard. He looked at Tala, then at the unbound rancher, his eyes narrowing. But the news he carried was too big for petty accusations. "Barstow comes." The scout said, "What?" Tala stood up. "He has rallied the men from the town, and others, mercenaries. 30 rifles. They are riding for the canyon entrance. They say it is a final sweep. They say they are coming to clear the route." The blood drained from Tala's face. "It is night. They are riding at night. They carry torches." The scout said, "They want to burn us out." Nantan's voice came from outside. "Prepare the ambush. We will fight them at the Narrows." Jake struggled to his feet. Swaying, he grabbed Tala's arm. "Tala, listen to me. If they trap you in the Narrows, it will be a slaughter. Barstow will have dynamite. I know how these men think." "What can we do?" Tala asked, panic rising in her voice. "We have few bullets. We are weary." "Let me go," Jake said. "Are you mad?" The scout stepped forward, hand on his knife. "You will run to them." "No," Jake shouted. "I can stop them, or slow them down. I know the terrain. I can lead them into the box canyon to the east. I can give you time to get the women and children up the cliffs." He looked at Tala, his eyes pleading. "Trust me, please. It is the only way." Tala looked at the scout, then back at Jake. She saw the desperation in his face. She saw the truth of his offer. He was offering to become a traitor to his own race to save hers. She pulled the knife from her belt. The scout tensed, but Tala turned to Jake. She grabbed his shirt, pulling him close. Her eyes were fierce, burning with a mix of terror and love. "If you betray us," she hissed, her face inches from his, "I will hunt you down. I will find you. Jake Monroe, and I will cut your heart out." "I know," Jake said. She slashed the remaining cords of leather that hung from his wrists. She shoved his gun belt, which lay in the corner, into his hands. "Go," she said. "Ride fast." Jake buckled the belt. He looked at her one last time. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to promise he would come back, but there was no time for lies. He nodded to the scout, pushed past him, and ran out into the night, toward his horse. Tala watched him go, her hand clutching the knife, her heart pounding a rhythm of fear and hope against her ribs. She had just cut the bond of the prisoner, but she had tied herself to him forever. The bay horse was lathered in white foam, its sides heaving like a bellows, but Jake Monroe did not let up. He drove his spurs into the animal's flanks, leaning low over the neck to cut the wind. The pain in his own body was a dull, rhythmic roar that matched the pounding of hooves. His ribs, cracked from the beating in the Apache camp, screamed with every jolt of the saddle. His left eye was swollen shut, pulsating with heat, and the dried blood on his face cracked like old parchment in the dry air. He was racing the sun. The great orb was sliding down toward the western mesas, turning the sky into a cauldron of copper and violet. But more importantly, he was racing hate. Ahead of him, a column of dust rose against the cliffs. It was the posse, Barstow's men. They were moving with the slow, inexorable purpose of a glacier. A mass of armed men convinced of their own righteousness. They were heading for the narrow neck of the canyon, the choke point where the walls squeezed together before opening into the Apache Bowl. If they reached the narrows, it would be a turkey shoot. The Apache, desperate and outgunned, would be trapped against the cliffs. The women and children would have nowhere to run. It would not be a battle. It would be an execution. Jake cut across the open scrub, taking a dangerous shortcut through a dry wash filled with tumbled boulders. His horse stumbled, recovering with a terrified grunt, but Jake kept his balance, his eyes fixed on the gap in the rocks ahead. He had to get in front of them. He had to be the stone in the road. The sheriff, Miller, rode at the head of the column, his face slick with sweat and doubt. Beside him, Henry Barstow sat straight-backed on a high-stepping black mare, looking like a general inspecting his troops. Behind them, 30 men rode in a loose formation, rifles resting across their saddles, their mood a volatile mix of fear and bravado. They rounded the bend of the canyon wall and pulled up short. A lone rider blocked the path. Jake Monroe sat his trembling horse in the center of the trail. He looked like a man who had crawled out of a grave. His clothes were torn. His face was a mask of bruises and gore, and he swayed slightly in the saddle, but his right hand rested steady near the grip of his Colt. "Hold up!" Miller shouted, raising a hand. The posse halted, horses milling and snorting. "Jake," Miller said, his voice cracking with surprise. "Jesus, man! Look at you. We thought the savages had skinned you." "They did not touch me," Jake lied, his voice a rasp that sounded like gravel grinding together. "I rode out to scout." Barstow rode forward, his eyes narrowing as he took in Jake's battered appearance. "You look like you went 12 rounds with a thresher, Monroe. You expect us to believe you were just scouting." "I am telling you to turn back," Jake said, ignoring the taunt. "I found sign." "Fresh sign? What kind of sign?" Miller asked, glancing nervously at the high ridges. "War party," Jake said. He pointed toward the south, away from the camp. "Big one, maybe 50 rifles. They are circling around Painted Rock. If you go into this canyon now, they will flank you. They will cut you off from town and pick you apart one by one." A ripple of unease went through the men. They were bullies, not soldiers. The idea of being flanked, of fighting a disciplined force, drained the whiskey courage right out of them. 50? A man in the back asked. "I did not sign on for a war." Barstow turned in his saddle, his face flushing with anger. "He is lying," Barstow shouted. "Look at him. He is protecting them. There is no war party at Painted Rock. The Apache are hiding in those caves right up ahead, guarding their squaws." "I am telling you," Jake said, keeping his voice flat and hard. "You ride in there, you die. The canyon is a trap." Miller wiped his face with a yellow bandana. "Maybe we should check it out. Henry, if Jake says there's a party to the south, he is stalling you. You fool!" Barstow snapped. "He has been treating with them, sleeping with them. For all I know, he wants us to chase shadows while they slip away." Barstow spurred his horse closer to Jake, his eyes cold and hard as flint. "Move aside, Monroe. We are going in. We are going to clear this rat's nest once and for all." "I cannot let you do that," Jake said. Barstow laughed. A harsh, barking sound. "You cannot let us? You are one man, Jake, and a traitor at that. You really think you can stop 30 decent men from doing their duty?" "Duty?" Jake's voice rose, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Is that what you call this? You are not here for safety. Henry, you are here for a deed. You want the water. You want the road for your railroad investors." Barstow stiffened. The truth spoken so plainly in the open air, struck a nerve. "Shut your mouth, Monroe." He told me himself. Jake shouted to the posse. "He wants the ranch. He wants the canyon. He does not care if you boys bleed for it, as long as he gets the title. This is not about protecting the town. It is about lining his pockets." "That is a lie," Barstow roared. He drew his pistol, the movement sudden and violent. "Sheriff," Jake yelled, "do not let him lead these men into a massacre for profit." Miller looked from Jake to Barstow. He saw the greed in Barstow's eyes, the fanaticism. He saw the desperate conviction in Jake's bloodied face. The lawman wavered, his hand hovering over his own gun, paralyzed by indecision. "I'm going through," Barstow declared, "and anyone who stands in my way is an enemy of the territory." Barstow raised his gun, aiming not at Jake, but firing a shot into the air to rally his men. Forward. But Jake did not move. In a fluid motion, driven by a desperation that overrode all fear, Jake drew his revolver. He did not aim at the posse. He aimed directly at Henry Barstow's chest. Another step. "Henry, and I drop you where you sit." The silence that followed was absolute. The wind whistled through the rocks. The posse froze, a white man drawing on another white man to protect Indians. It was a violation of the unwritten code of the West so profound it stunned them. "You would not dare," Barstow hissed. "Try me," Jake said. "I have nothing left to lose." For a second, it seemed the standoff might hold. Miller opened his mouth to order everyone to stand down. Then, a gun cracked. It came from the back of the posse, a young rancher named Davis. His nerves, frayed to the breaking point by the tension and the talk of war parties, had twitched. His finger tightened on the trigger of his Winchester. The bullet struck the dirt at the feet of Jake's horse. The bay reared, screaming. Chaos erupted. It was as if the shot had broken a dam. Men shouted. Horses bucked, and instinct took over. Barstow fired at Jake. Jake fired back, his shot going wide as his horse spun. "Take cover," Miller screamed, but his voice was lost in the roar of gunfire. Jake dove from his saddle just as a volley of lead cut through the space where he had been. He hit the hard, rocky ground, rolling toward the cover of a fallen boulder. A searing heat tore through his left shoulder. A bullet, punching through muscle and bone. He gasped, the impact knocking the wind out of him. He scrambled behind the rock, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his vision gray at the edges. Above them, the canyon walls came alive. The Apache warriors, hidden in the crevices and behind the scrub oak of the upper slopes, had been watching. They had seen the confrontation. They had seen the white men turn their guns on each other, but to them, the gunfire meant only one thing. The attack had begun. Nantan, watching from a high ledge, saw the posse firing toward the canyon mouth. He saw the rancher fall. "Fire," Nantan commanded. Arrows and bullets rained down from the heights. The sound was terrifying. The whistle of shafts, the ricochet of lead off stone. The posse, already confused and fighting among themselves, panicked. "They are in the walls!" Someone screamed. Barstow's men returned fire blindly, shooting at the cliffs. Horses went down. Men were thrown. The narrow pass became a kill box of swirling dust and screaming men. Tala, positioned behind a limestone outcrop with her bow, scanned the chaotic scene below. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. She was not looking for targets. She was looking for him. She saw the bay horse gallop riderless back down the trail. She saw the posse taking cover behind rocks and dead horses. And then she saw him. Jake was dragging himself through the dust. He was not retreating. He was moving forward. He was moving toward a large, flat boulder near the center of the pass. Behind it, Henry Barstow was crouching, reloading his pistol, shouting orders that no one was following. "Jake," Tala whispered, "the name a prayer and a curse." Down in the dust, Jake Monroe was operating on pure adrenaline. The pain in his shoulder was a white-hot fire, but his mind was singularly focused. He saw Barstow. He saw the man who had orchestrated this madness, the man who was willing to burn the world to own the ashes. Jake holstered his empty gun and lunged. He crashed into Barstow, tackling him around the waist. The impact drove the breath out of both men. They rolled into the open, grappling in the dirt. Barstow, though softer, was fresh and uninjured. He struck Jake across the face with the barrel of his pistol, reopening the cut over Jake's eye. Blood blinded him. "Get off me, you traitorous dog," Barstow screamed. He kicked Jake in the stomach, hard. Jake doubled over, gasping. Barstow scrambled to his feet, leveling his gun at Jake's head. "You chose your side! Monroe!" Barstow yelled, his face twisted into a mask of hate. "You die with them!" Jake looked up, his vision swimming. He tried to raise his hand, to defend himself, but his body refused to obey. He stared down the barrel of the gun. Barstow cocked the hammer. High above. Tala stepped out from the cover of the rock. She drew the string of her bow to her cheek. Her arms were steady, forged by years of grinding corn and drawing water, fueled now by a love that terrified her. She saw the two men below, the white rancher, broken and bleeding in the dirt, the speculator standing over him, the executioner. Time seemed to slow. She remembered the wounded boy in the camp. She remembered her husband, shot in the back. She remembered Jake's hand hovering near her face through the fence, the gentleness in his eyes when he spoke of his ghosts. If she loosed this arrow, there was no going back. She would not just be killing an enemy. She would be saving a white man in front of her entire tribe. She would be choosing him. Tala released her breath. She released the string. The arrow hissed through the air. It struck Henry Barstow in the center of his chest. The speculator gasped. A wet, shocked sound. The gun fell from his hand. He looked down at the feathered shaft protruding from his silk vest, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked up at the cliffs, then down at Jake. "Savages," he whispered. Barstow's knees buckled. He collapsed forward, falling face first into the dust of the road he had wanted to own. He twitched once and lay still. The sheriff saw Barstow fall. He saw the arrow. "Hold your fire!" Miller screamed, his voice breaking. "Cease fire! Barstow is down!" The cry went up and down the line of the posse, the death of their leader, and the sudden realization that they were being picked off from above broke their spirit completely. "We are done," Miller shouted, throwing his gun down. "We are pulling back." The shooting tapered off into sporadic pops. Then silence, a heavy, ringing silence that was louder than the noise. The posse members who could ride scrambled onto their horses. Those who were wounded crawled for cover. They looked at the cliffs, waiting for the final volley that would finish them. But it did not come. Nantan, seeing the white leader fall and the others surrender, raised his hand. The Apache warriors held their fire. Down on the canyon floor, the dust began to settle. The air smelled of sulfur and copper. Jake lay near Barstow's body. He tried to push himself up, but his arm collapsed under him. He rolled onto his back, staring up at the darkening sky. He felt cold, so very cold, despite the heat of the rocks. Then he heard running footsteps, light, fast steps. He turned his head. Tala was running down the scree slope. She moved reckless of the danger, sliding, jumping, rushing toward him. She reached the canyon floor and sprinted to where he lay. She dropped to her knees in the dirt, ignoring the staring eyes of the sheriff and the remaining posse members. She ignored the warriors descending from the cliffs. "Jake," she choked out. She pressed her hands to his shoulder, trying to staunch the flow of blood. Her hands were stained red in seconds. "Tala," Jake whispered. She lifted his head, cradling it in her lap. Her tears fell onto his face, mixing with the dust and blood. She looked around wildly, her eyes blazing with a fierce, protective panic. "Help him!" she screamed at the sheriff. "Do you not have medicine? Help him!" Miller stood frozen, staring. He had never seen an Apache woman hold a white man like that. It broke every rule of his world. Jake reached up with his good hand. He gripped her wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong, the desperate clutch of a drowning man. "Tala," he said, his voice gurgling slightly. "Look at me." She looked down, her face twisting with grief. "Do not speak. Save your breath. I have to." he said. He coughed, a wet, hacking sound. If this is it, if this is where I end, inside the canyon. He paused, fighting for air. It is better than a battlefield, he whispered. Better to die in your hands than alone in the dark. No, Tala sobbed. You do not die. I forbid it. Jake smiled, a weak, crooked lifting of his lip. You always tell me what to do. His eyes found hers, locking onto them. The gray fog was closing in, but he needed to say it. He needed it to be true. I love you, he whispered. The words were raw, stripped of all pretense. I think I have loved you since the spring. Tala's throat tightened so hard she could barely breathe. She leaned down close, her forehead touching his, her black hair creating a curtain that shut out the war, the sheriff, and the tribe. I was afraid, she confessed, her English broken and halting. I was afraid to want you. I thought, if I loved you, I betrayed my dead. She kissed his forehead, fierce and tender. But I am not afraid anymore. Jake, I choose you. Do you hear me? I choose you. Jake let out a long, shuddering breath. I hear you. Finally, I can forgive myself. A little. His hand slipped from her wrist. His eyes fluttered and closed. His head grew heavy in her lap. Jake, she cried, shaking him gently. He did not answer. His chest rose and fell, but the rhythm was shallow and weak. Tala looked up. The sky above the canyon had turned a deep, bruised purple. Heavy storm clouds, the ones that had been threatening for days, were finally gathering overhead. A low rumble of thunder rolled through the canyon, echoing off the walls like the growl of a waking beast. She looked across the battlefield. Nantan stood 10 paces away, his face unreadable. The sheriff stood by his horse, looking defeated and small. Tala remained on her knees, holding the unconscious rancher against her chest. She defied them all with her posture. She defied the history that said they must be enemies. The first drop of rain fell, hitting the dust near Barstow's dead hand. Then another. Tala looked up at the sky, her face wet with rain and tears, waiting to see if the storm would bring life, or if it would simply wash the blood away into the thirsty earth. The rain that had threatened for weeks finally fell, but it did not come as a gentle baptism. It came as a cold, driving sheet that hissed against the hot rocks of the canyon floor, turning the dust into slick red mud. The storm washed over the dead and the living with equal indifference. The silence that followed the gunfire was heavy, a physical weight that pressed down on the chest. It was broken only by the low, guttural groans of wounded men and the sharp, frightened whinny of a horse with a shattered leg. The smell of the place was a thick, metallic tang of blood mixed with the sulfur of black powder and the sudden, sweet scent of wet sage. Survivors moved like ghosts through the downpour. Apache warriors, their paint streaked by the rain, moved silently among the rocks, checking their own fallen. Members of the posse, stripped of their bravado, huddled near the canyon walls, wrapping bandages around torn flesh, their eyes wide and hollow. In the center of the pass, the bodies lay where they had fallen. Henry Barstow lay face down in the mud, the arrow protruding from his back a stark monument to his ambition. The expensive silk vest, the polished boots, the dreams of a railroad empire, all of it ended here, in the dirt he had tried to steal. Sheriff Miller stood over the body. He held his hat in his hands, the rain plastering his thinning hair to his skull. He looked small, shrunken by the violence he had helped unleash. He looked up as Nantan approached. The Apache elder walked with a slow, deliberate gait. He was flanked by 2 warriors, their bows strung but lowered. Nantan stopped 5 paces from the sheriff. The 2 leaders, one of the law and one of the land, stared at each other across the corpse of the man who had played them both. He lied to us, Miller said, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. He told us you were gathering for a massacre. He told us Jake was a traitor leading us into a trap. Nantan looked down at Barstow, then back at the sheriff. He spoke to your greed. Sheriff, Nantan said, And you listened because it is easier to believe in monsters than to believe in neighbors." Miller winced. He looked at the carnage around them. 3 of his men dead. 4 wounded. 2 Apache warriors lay still near the scree slope. "I am sorry," Miller said. The words felt inadequate. Clumsy things that fell flat in the wet air. "We should not have come. The ambush on your trading party. The terrorizing of your camp. It was wrong. I let him twist the law." Nantan nodded slowly. His face was a mask of weary dignity, etched with the lines of 100 such griefs. "We have heard many apologies from white men," Nantan said. "They usually come after the shooting stops and before the fences go up. Words are like the wind." "Sheriff, they change direction when the season turns. What do you want?" Miller asked. "I cannot bring the dead back." "No," Nantan said, "but you can secure the living." The elder pointed to the canyon mouth with his staff. "No soldiers," Nantan commanded. "You will go back to your town and you will tell them that the Apache held the pass. You will tell them that the speculator died because of his own treachery. You will tell them that this route remains open to my people, now and forever. No fences, no tolls." Miller wiped water from his eyes. "And the rancher? Monroe?" "He stays," Nantan said. "He bled for this peace. The land has accepted his offering." Miller looked over to where Tala was kneeling in the mud. Her body curled protectively over Jake's unconscious form. "I will drop the papers," Miller said, his voice heavy with resignation. "I will make it official. The territory will recognize the claim, with the easement for your tribe." "See that you do," Nantan said, "because if you come back with guns, Sheriff, we will not aim for the speculator next time." The fever took Jake Monroe into a dark and disjointed country. He was carried up the steep trails to the high caves, a journey of agony where every jolt of the litter sent spikes of fire through his shattered shoulder. He did not wake when they laid him on a bed of furs in the driest part of the shelter. He did not wake when Nantan dug the bullet out with a knife heated in the fire, though he screamed a sound that echoed off the stone walls. For 3 days and 3 nights, he burned. In his delirium, time folded in on itself. He was back in Virginia, smelling the smoke of cannons. He was standing in a burning village, watching winter lodges turn to ash. He saw the face of his dead fiancée, Elizabeth, but when she turned to look at him, her eyes were dark and fierce, and she wore buckskin. Tala sat beside him, a constant, anchoring presence in the swirling fog of his sickness. She barely slept. She wetted his lips with water from a gourd. She forced bitter herbal teas down his throat, mixtures of willow bark and sage that Nantan prepared to fight the infection. "Tala," he would murmur, thrashing on the furs. "The soldiers, they are coming." "Shh," she would whisper, placing a cool cloth on his forehead. "The soldiers are gone. Jake, you are safe, safe." The word seemed alien to him. Tala watched him with a mixture of exhaustion and a terrifying, blooming hope. She wiped the sweat from his chest, her fingers tracing the scars of old wars and the fresh, angry red of the new wound. She felt the heat radiating off him, terrified that the fire inside would consume him completely. She saw the way her people looked at her when she left the shelter to fetch water. Some eyes were kind, understanding the debt they owed the rancher, but others were hard, filled with the judgment of centuries. "She nurses the white man," they whispered. "She has forgotten her husband. She gives her heart to the enemy." Tala heard them, and she did not care. She had seen Jake tackle Barstow. She had seen him offer his life to stop the slaughter. That act had burned away the labels of white and Apache. There was only the man, and he was dying. On the 4th night, the fever spiked. Jake convulsed, his skin gray and clammy. Nantan came and chanted low words over him, burning sweetgrass. But the elder's eyes were grave. "He is walking the spirit road." "Tala," Nantan said gently, "prepare yourself. He may not turn back." "No," Tala said, gripping Jake's good hand. "He is stubborn. He will not leave." She leaned close to his ear, her hair falling around his face like a curtain. "You do not get to die. Jake Monroe," she whispered fiercely in English, "you promised to build a trading post. You promised to keep the canyon open. You do not get to break your word." She stayed there all night, holding him, willing her own strength into his battered body. She poured her will into him, a silent, desperate prayer to whatever gods were listening. Just before dawn, the heat broke. Jake gasped, a sudden, deep inhalation, as if he had been holding his breath for days. His body relaxed. The gray pallor faded, replaced by the flush of natural sleep. His skin cooled. Tala slumped forward, resting her forehead against the furs, and wept silently. When Jake finally opened his eyes, the world was steady. The light filtering into the cave was soft and golden. He tried to move, and the pain in his shoulder was sharp and immediate, grounding him in reality. He turned his head. Tala was asleep, sitting up, her head resting against the stone wall, her hands loose in her lap. She looked thinner, her face drawn with fatigue. "Tala," he croaked. His voice was a rusted hinge. Her eyes snapped open. She was at his side in an instant, her hand on his forehead. "You are cool," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "The fire is gone." Jake looked at her. He saw the dark circles under her eyes. He saw the worry that had etched new lines around her mouth. "How long?" he asked. "4 suns." She said, We thought you were traveling to the ancestors. Not without you," he said. He tried to sit up, but she pushed him back gently. "Lie still. The wound is deep. You lost much blood." Jake lay back, but he reached out and took her hand. This time, there was no hesitation. He laced his fingers through hers, feeling the calluses on her palm, the strength in her grip. "I had dreams," Jake said quietly. "I dreamed I was back in the war. I dreamed of the burning, but every time the fire got too hot, you were there. You were pulling me out." Tala looked down at their joined hands. Her guard, usually so high and impenetrable, lay in ruins on the floor of the cave. "I could not let you go," she admitted softly. "I have buried a husband. I have buried a sister. I told the spirits they could not have you too." She looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. "They say I am a traitor for sitting here. Jake, they say I have gone soft for the white man, but I do not care. When I saw you fall in the canyon, the world went dark." Jake squeezed her hand. "I know. I heard them talking in town. They say I have gone native. They say I turned on my own kind." He took a breath, wincing as his ribs protested. "Let them talk. Tala, I am done living for them. I spent my whole life trying to be what a soldier should be, what a rancher should be. I divided my life into the time before the war and the time after the guilt. I lived in the shadow of what I had done." He pulled her hand up, pressing it against his cheek. "But that is gone now. There is no before and after the war anymore. There is only before Tala, and after Tala." Tala let out a small, choked sob. She leaned forward, her resistance crumbling. She rested her forehead against his, breathing in the scent of him, sweat and sage and life. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I know," Jake said. "I am too, but we are here. We are alive." He turned his head slightly, and his lips brushed against hers. It was a tentative question, a testing of the boundary that had stood between them for so long. Tala answered it. She pressed her mouth to his, gentle at first, afraid of hurting him, and then with a sudden, desperate hunger. It was a kiss that tasted of salt and survival. It was the breaking of a dam. Carefully, mindful of his wounds, Tala lay down beside him on the furs. There were no more words. Words belonged to the council fires and the law books. What happened in the quiet of the cave was older than language. She touched his face, his chest, the good shoulder, mapping him. He touched her with a reverence that made her tremble. In the dim light, amidst the smell of sickness and healing, they came together. It was not a conquest, but a union. It was a fierce, tender reclaiming of life in the face of so much death. They held each other as if the world outside might blow away if they let go, binding themselves together with skin and breath and a love that defied the history of their blood. Recovery was a slow season. Jake grew strong enough to sit, then to stand, then to walk with a limp to the mouth of the cave. He watched the seasons turn. The rains that had started on the day of the battle continued, sporadic and blessed. The brown, dead hills began to flush with a haze of green. The judgment of the communities did not vanish, but it settled into a begrudging reality. When Jake finally rode back down to his ranch, he did not ride alone. Tala rode beside him. They passed Caleb and Silas near the corral. The cowhands stopped their work, staring. They saw the way Tala sat her horse, proud and unyielding. They saw the way Jake looked at her. Silas spat tobacco juice into the dust, then nodded once. Slowly. It was not approval, but it was acceptance. A week later, Sheriff Miller rode out with a document. A formal meeting was held near the spring where Jake had first left the flower. Nantan stood with his warriors. Jake stood with his men. The sheriff unfolded the paper on the hood of a wagon. "It is done," Miller said, his voice flat. "The territory acknowledges the easement. The canyon is open range for the Apache people. No fences, no tolls, and the deed to the Monroe Ranch is affirmed. Boundary secure." Jake signed the paper. Nantan made his mark, a jagged X that looked like a bird in flight. "It is paper," Nantan said, looking at Jake. "Paper burns, but memory lasts." He stepped closer to Jake, his dark eyes boring into the rancher's soul. "You have my blessing to walk with my niece," Nantan said. "She has chosen you, and she has the sight of a hawk. But hear me, Jake Monroe, if you break these promises, if you close this canyon, or if you bring tears to her eyes, the rocks themselves will rise against you. The wind will carry your name to the wolves. Do you understand?" "I understand," Jake said solemnly. "I will guard her, and I will guard this land. With my life." Nantan nodded. "Then we are finished with words. Now we build." The building of the trading post became a legend in the territory, though few would admit it in the saloons of the town. It rose on a flat shelf of rock near the entrance to the canyon. It was a structure of compromise. The walls were built of red stone, laid by Apache hands that knew the grain of the earth. The roof was timber and beam, raised by white hands that knew the geometry of framing. Jake and Tala worked side by side. They hauled stone, mixed mud, and smoothed lumber. It was grueling work under the brutal sun, but there was a joy in it. For the first time, the energy of the canyon was being used for creation, not defense. When it was finished, it was a modest thing, a low building with a wide porch and a corral in the back. But it was a miracle. Apache hunters brought deer hides, woven baskets, and turquoise. Settlers, overcoming their prejudice with the lure of commerce, brought sugar, coffee, and metal tools. The exchange was tense at first. Men watched each other's hands. Insults were swallowed. But slowly, the logic of survival took over. A rancher needed a tracker. An Apache needed a steel knife. The trading post became a neutral ground, a place where the two worlds touched without bleeding. The ranch recovered. The rains brought the grass back, tall and sweet. The cattle grew fat. Jake hired 2 young Apache men to help work the herd, a move that scandalized the town but saved his business. He learned their language. They learned his. In the Apache camp, the hollow eyes of the children filled out. The blankets were thicker. The fires burned brighter. But the world was not perfect. There were still nights when shots were fired in the distance. There were still settlers who spat when Jake walked by in town. There were still government agents who came with new maps and new threats, looking for ways to break the treaty. Jake and Tala lived in the space between. They were never fully white, never fully Apache. They were an island of 2. 6 months later, on an evening that smelled of rain and ozone, Jake and Tala rode out to the high ridge overlooking the trading route. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls in strokes of fire and blood. But the colors no longer looked violent to Jake. They looked like glory. They stopped at the spring. The water was flowing strong, bubbling over the stones Tala had placed so long ago. Jake dismounted and helped Tala down. He held her for a moment, his hands resting on her waist, looking into her face. The lines of worry had softened, replaced by a quiet strength. "Do you remember?" Jake asked. "The first time I saw you here, I remember," Tala said, smiling. "I was deciding where to put the arrow. I am glad you missed." Jake said. I never miss, she replied. I chose to wait. They walked to the edge of the ridge, looking out over the vast, broken landscape. The trail below was marked with fresh hoof prints, shod horses and unshod ponies, traveling the same path. It is fragile, Jake said, looking at the horizon where the storm clouds were gathering again. The peace, the town is still angry. The army is still watching. It could all burn down tomorrow. Tala took his hand, interlacing her fingers with his. Then we build it again, she said. She looked at the darkening west, where the stars were beginning to prick the veil of the sky. We carry the dead with us. Jake, my husband. Your Elizabeth, the speculator, the boy who was shot. They are all here, but we do not let them bury us. We choose a new path. Jake nodded. He looked at the woman who had saved his life, the woman who had taught him that honor was not about fighting, but about standing firm when the fighting stopped. He kissed her hand, a courtly gesture that made her laugh softly. To the future. Then, Jake said, whatever it brings, to us, Tala whispered. They stood together as the twilight deepened into night, two silhouettes against the immense, ancient sky. The wind blew around them, carrying the scent of wet earth and the promise of a new season. The ending was not written in stone. The future was uncertain, hemmed in by prejudice and politics and the harsh realities of the frontier. But as they stood there, shoulder to shoulder, watching the moon rise over the canyon they had saved, there was a flicker of hope. It was stubborn, and it was fierce, and it burned like a signal fire in the vast, dark west. Thank you for riding along on this journey through the dust and shadows of the Arizona Territory. It has been a privilege to bring the story of Jake and Tala to life for you. A story not just of gunsmoke and conflict, but of the hard, messy work of building bridges where there were only walls. I would love to hear your thoughts on this conclusion. Did the open-ended piece feel earned to you? Where are you listening from today? Please leave a comment below sharing your location and your impressions. If you enjoyed this tale of the Wild West, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories of the frontier, where history and legend collide. Until the next time, keep your powder dry and your eyes on the horizon.